Well, welcome everyone. This is our follow-up to our series that we did this winter that was called Farm Financial Skills for Kansas Women in Agriculture. We just wanted to connect with those participants and anyone across Kansas and just talk about the concerns and some things going on in agriculture related to COVID-19. I'm Robin Reid. I'm an extension farm economist with the Department of Agricultural Economics at Kansas State University.
And I'm LaVell Winsor. I am one of the farm analysts through K-State Research and Extension.
And I'm Rebeccca McFarland with the Frontier Extension District, and I'm the Family and Child Development Agent.
And just some housekeeping things here before we get started. If you could go ahead and click forward, LaVell. If you're new to Zoom, there's going to be some features that we want you to keep turned off, and that's your microphone and your camera. So if you see in the bottom left-hand corner where it says mute and start video, if you could keep those both with the red X across them, that means they're shut off. We would invite you to comment on what we're talking about or ask questions as we go along. And to do that, I've circled the little chat feature there. If you click on that, you can type questions in or comments to us. Also, this is Eric Atkinson. If you've never seen him, he is the one that runs the Agricultural Today radio show. I just took a snapshot as we were talking to him the other day. So those are the housekeeping things. The structure of this, we're going to try to do about 45 minutes of material and then open it up for questions at the end. So life has changed as we know it. Obviously, everybody can relate to this in some way. Here's LaVell and I back in January and February when we were conducting that Farm Financial series. And here's us today. I have my two little office assistants here, and LaVell's currently, like many of you, homeschooling her son, Braden here. And like I said, a lot of you are in similar situations. And like us, we're trying to figure out how this is and will affect agriculture. So that is really what we wanted to talk to you about today.
Yes, and as Robin said, obviously things have changed for all of us quite dramatically. You'll notice that Robin and Rebeccca and I just popped on with the video feed for a brief period of time. And that is in part because we are all working from our home offices and we all live in fairly rural areas that don't have the best service. So we're not, for the most part, we're not going to actually show our video of ourselves as we speak, just because that seems to help some. But let's go ahead and we'll jump into the presentation itself. So not that you had to participate in the workshop back in January and February, but we thought we were in a time with a time that was already challenging from an economic standpoint with, right around break-even prices and things like that. And out of nowhere, here comes a very uncertain time with COVID-19. It has thrown a monkey wrench in the U.S. and world economies. The ag economy has been challenged. Health concerns for ourselves and for our loved ones, being quarantined and limited to where we can go with massive shutdowns, which has dramatically changed all of our lives. Many of us are now trying to homeschool our children on top of working as well. And of course, for most of us, we're preparing for spring planting and just so many other areas that it's added a lot of uncertainty. So that's really why we wanted to circle back and connect with you again. And of course, the market volatility, and not just agriculture, but the stocks, the oils, and the metals as well. So just high anxiety times. Wanted to talk a little bit about a black swan event. This might be a term that you have heard before, and would certainly categorize this time under that as black swan. So that is an unpredictable event that's beyond what we would normally expect of a situation, having severe consequences and extreme rarity, severe impact. And I think as we think about this time, it meets so much of that criteria where it's just quite significant. And below here are some of the key takeaways with just being a rare event. And, as we were getting ready for this webinar, I was thinking, the next worst time that I remember in my professional career was the 2008 situation. And prior to that was probably 9/11. But 2008, of course, was quite dramatic from an economic standpoint. But of course, we were not dealing with all of these pieces of the health concerns and things like that. And so this just seems like, the biggest magnitude issue that I can remember in my career, and I think probably true for others as well. So, and I'm going to now pass it over to Robin to talk about some of the economics pieces here.
All right, thank you, LaVell. Some of you may have seen this already. This was a study recently released by the American Farm Bureau Federation, and it's attempting to capture the losses to each segment of our agricultural industry. So you'll notice the purple, the wheat at the top, has actually climbed some as countries around the world are stockpiling grains that are storable and readily consumable. So for us, that affects our wheat. A lot of other countries, that's rice. So wheat and rice are the things that are being stockpiled right now. So we've actually seen some increase in that commodity in a lot of respects. Soybeans and corn have dropped. I'm going to get into ethanol and a little talk about that in just a minute here. The ones that have really been hit the hardest are our dairy industry, cattle, and hogs. These are the ones that have processing trouble and just a switch in demand for what kind of commodities these are being turned into. So as just a general overview of what's going on, and then I'm going to dive into each of these segments a little bit at a time. So let's start out with corn here. And on all of these next charts, the dark line is the nearby futures price. The red line is a cash price for our western Kansas areas, and then the blue line is the central and eastern Kansas cash prices. So I'm sure a lot of you remember last August we saw some lows in our commodity markets, and then a small decent recovery there where we were getting upwards towards $4 corn, and we kind of expected that trend to continue or hover around in that $3.84 range, and then this event hit. And so now we're seeing corn down in the $3.30 range. As LaVell just talked about, this is really two black swan events happening at the same time as far as how corn's being impacted. COVID-19 is causing a lot less people to be on the roads across our nation. The fuel that's not being consumed domestically is maybe up to a third less of what we typically do this time of year. But the other event is the oil war, and that's going on between Saudi Arabia and Russia, where each has ramped up their production and has lowered the crude oil price to $20 a barrel in a lot of cases here. So, are these lower gas and diesel prices good? No, they really are not. As far as input costs, yes, we might benefit from that a little, but the overarching ramifications are really bad for the ag industry when we start seeing fuel prices that low. So all of these slides here I will mention as far as the crops part were taken from my colleague Dan O'Brien, who did a whole webinar on this last Thursday. So I'm just summarizing the key points, but the recording is on the agmanager.info website if you want more detail into some of these topics. So these low oil prices really has taken a big hit on our ethanol industry. So in this graph, you can see the red line is the cost of production for a gallon of ethanol. And then the blue line is the price received for that gallon of ethanol. And then on the bottom is the net profit or loss for that industry. Now you'll see there's been some good times in the past, 2005 to 2007, 2013 to 2014, but now we're getting into some fairly large losses where it's 43-cent loss on every gallon of ethanol that these plants are making right now. And that's why we're hearing about these plants closing. it's estimated that about a third of the ethanol plants in the US may close because of this situation. And this is also creating a shortage of dried distillers grains, or DDGs, for some of you out there that have livestock. Now, how is this affecting our corn market? It's estimated that about 200 to 500 million less bushels of corn will be needed because of the ethanol production slowdown with these plant closures. And on top of that, USDA is projecting a large crop this year across our nation, which brings our stocks up and really is going to take a hit on that originally projected corn price for this next marketing year. So there's not a lot of good news when we're looking at the corn enterprise right now. I do want to throw one little figure up here on grain sorghum. So grain sorghum doesn't have a futures price, but it typically tracks very well with corn futures. So the dark blue in this one is the corn futures, and then the cash prices are sorghum prices. As we have a hit to our ethanol industry, obviously that impacts sorghum as well, because sorghum is used for ethanol. But we have seen some strengthening in our sorghum prices because of some recent purchases from China. You can see there that the eastern and central Kansas sorghum prices are actually above corn. So there is some potential in the sorghum industry right now to have some better returns this year than there has been in previous years. Now moving on to soybeans. So soybean has seen some lows and a big basis or difference between our local cash price and the futures market. Recently, among that COVID-19 outbreak, you can see that central eastern Kansas cash price has actually gained and has gotten fairly close to the futures market price, where western Kansas is still hanging below that $8 a bushel. This is impacted somewhat by the demand for less biofuels. As we have that oil war and as crude oil prices are down, this affects soybeans as well that are used for diesel fuel. There are some positives in this market, however. The crop in Brazil is a little smaller than anticipated as they had some dry weather late in the season. There's some disruptions in Argentina as far as transportation, just getting those soybeans out to the ports. And we don't really know down there how the COVID-19 is going to play out and impact their ability to get exports out. So there's going to be a lot of variability in this market, but there's in general a lot less soybeans sitting around, and the prospects for this year do look a little better in the soybean area. One other thing too is the increased demand for soybean meal. As we have these ethanol plants closing, we don't have DDGs around. A lot of that eastern Kansas strengthening in the cash market is because of Atchison, Emporia, Wichita being the processors there and bidding up that soybean price in those areas. Now, one more here. Let's talk about wheat. Now, as bread was flying off the shelves, and in some places still is, we see a strong domestic milling demand for meat for wheat and flour, and bread. So people, as they're staying home more and eating out less, tend to buy and eat more grains and vegetables than when they're going to restaurants. If you couple this with USDA just projecting a lot less acres planted out there in the US than there has been in the past few years, we just have less wheat production in the United States. But really the biggest driver in our wheat market, as I alluded to earlier, there's countries, namely Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, are stockpiling wheat in the fear of the prolonged quarantines. And these are normally exporting countries for wheat. So when they're holding on to their stocks, that really opens up the export opportunities for us. So we are seeing some strengthening in the wheat market, as you can see, as our futures have climbed and our cash prices. Now, some other considerations as we go into the planting season here for our spring crops. Fertilizer tracks with the fuel price. So as we have our fuel prices, crude oil prices low, we're already seeing fertilizer quite a bit lower than last year, but it could be a lot lower by midsummer. Chemicals here, the The worry is, are we going to have any shortages as we go throughout the growing season? Many of our generic chemicals used in ag are actually imported from China. But so far, it does not seem to be any supply issues other than maybe some transportation issues locally. When we look at seed, we are not seeing a shortage here yet. A lot of that was pre-purchased and delivered at this point. Some producers might think about switching out of corn to soybeans or sorghum, given the economics right now, but as far along as we are, it's probably not going to be a lot as seed has already been purchased and fields are prepped. So switching over out of the crop enterprises into the livestock. So you've heard a lot about milk dumping and some issues in the dairy industry. Both that and the beef that I'm going to present here in a minute are just a reaction to fundamental shifts in demand when we have retail outlets closing, such as your restaurants, your schools, universities, things like that, and the supermarket shelves being hit hard. So a lot of our products like milk go through processing and are turned into things that can't readily be put on a supermarket shelf. And some examples of this are like the little packets of butter that you get when you go to a restaurant. Well, if a plant is set up to make that kind of product, it can't readily switch to something, that can be sold in a supermarket. Another example is just the jugs that milk is put in. As we're trying to get more gallons of milk on those grocery store shelves, we just don't have the infrastructure that can ramp up right away to produce more jugs to put that milk in. So it's really a shift in the retail demand, switching from wholesale stuff that would go to restaurants and schools to now trying to get products out there on the grocery store shelves. And that's creating a lot of issues in all of our livestock industries and milk. I'm going to dive into beef a little bit here because everybody's talking about the cattle prices falling, but grocery store prices increasing and some products just not being available. So let's dive into a little bit of what's going on there. So this is a chart from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, pulled from USDA data. And while the packer industry are making good profits right now, or there's good margins right now, there are some major issues at these packing plants as well. And if you think about this, think about the labor force. So packing plants employ hundreds or even thousands of people working in very close proximity to each other. And as those plants have had to make an adjustment to how they operate, such as spacing those workers out, having an additional downtime for cleaning and sanitation, this creates less productivity in those processing plants. Some of the employees are just not showing up to work. With the new Family First Act, some of those employees can stay home with their kids that are not in school if they don't have childcare and get paid to do so. Some of them are just getting afraid to come to work and just not showing up. And then a couple plants have had outbreaks and have had to just shut down or temporarily close. So you can see here the cattle slaughter numbers going back in history here, and the red being the 5-year average, the dotted line being last year, and now being the solid blue line. We've just had a deep dive in the amount of cattle that we can push through processing. And that's really putting the strain on feedlots to hold those cattle longer and or sell at lower prices. So bottom line, we have lots of cattle and a bottleneck at processing. That is a lot of the issue here. Now let's look at the consumer or the demand side. So if you think about when you go to a restaurant, those are typically the market that our good cuts of meat go into. So this is a graph of wholesale beef ribeye prices, and you can see just that steep dive in the price of the ribeye per pound as we have restaurants, schools, and other wholesale outlets closing. I was told by a fellow colleague who was at Dillon's recently that you can purchase a ribeye steak for $1 more a pound than 80% lean ground beef. And that is just insane to think about. The next graph I got here illustrates that, though, when you think about the wholesale beef bottom round prices. So this would be a ground beef equivalent here that has just taken off in demand and taken off in price, because that's typically the product that people are buying and taking home and putting in their freezers in preparation for being in quarantine or doing the staying at home order for a prolonged period of time. So as an aggregate, this has dropped the price for beef as our expensive cuts are getting cheaper, even though the ground beef is getting more expensive. And this next graph here kind of shows that, our wholesale beef has just really taken a tumble. We just don't have the avenue for those expensive cuts of meat in our grocery stores, or sorry, in our schools and our restaurants. So the initial hoarding of ground beef and pork and chicken is really over at this point. People got their freezers stocked and demand actually decreased in the grocery stores in some areas. And then the wholesale markets just are very limited right now. So as our expensive cuts are getting cheaper and just reducing the overall value of that carcass. Now, switching gears here, and then I'm going to turn it over to LaVell. A lot of the questions we're getting right now are in response to the CARES Act that was just passed. So $2 trillion relief package, the largest in U.S. history. There is $9.5 billion in there that is wrote as direct relief to agriculture, and that is defined through livestock, dairy, and specialty crops. Now, last night we got a lot of questions, what is a specialty crop? And that's the language used in the actual bill, but it specifically mentions those that sell at farmers markets or direct to school and restaurants. So there isn't, the $9.5 billion is directed at those that are hit especially hard during this time. The other $14 billion that was part of the direct to agriculture funding was used to replace the Commodity Credit Corporation funds, and that really was what MFP payments came out of, and that fund was actually running in the red. So that's kind of a replenish of that. Will that support any new MFP type payments for crop producers? That is yet to be determined. MFP was really a trade aid package, and what we're in now is not necessarily a trade situation. It's just a prolonged down ag economy. So I'm not ruling out that something couldn't be made out of that fund again to producers this year, but something to keep a watch for. We had a lot of questions also on the Payroll Protection Program, or the PPP. And I'm going to put some links in the chat as I turn it over to LaVell. That is really a whole webinar in itself as to what the different provisions of that are, what business qualifies, what doesn't, how you go about applying for that. So I'm going to put a couple links in the chat to a recent webinar and a paper and some materials from Roger McCohen, who is part of our department as well, to get some more information out on that. Finally, Farm Bill program payments will be made in October. The fall in prices really won't affect those too much. So what you initially signed up for here in March is probably what you can still kind of anticipate then. And USDA Farm Service Agency loans, they are extending the deadlines and relaxing some of the provisions for that loan process as well. So I'm going to turn it over to LaVell. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and we will keep going and take questions at the end here.
Okay, thank you, Robin. And just to follow up on that last slide that Robin had, I really encourage you to look at those links that she's going to post, because those have some really good information on them. Particularly Roger McCowen's has some summarizes each of them, and then has some nice almost kind of a 1, 2, 3 of what order you would look at those things, which is really, I found to be quite helpful. So part of Robin, wanted to lay the groundwork of what is going on with all of our ag markets, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about when plans change, because obviously things look quite different than they did just a couple of months ago. What are some things that you can be thinking about and doing? And just to remind you, for those folks who don't know me, I am one of the farm analysts with K-State Research and Extension. And so I go out and I work one-on-one with family farms. It might be a difficult financial situation. It may be an expansion situation. It can be any kind of situation that a family farm might be looking at, and I'll help them to evaluate that on a financial aspect. And one of the things with the farm analyst program is each of us also have ties to our own farms as well. So my husband and I farm between Topeka and Lawrence in the River Valley. And, I just want to, I guess, kind of extend my empathy as well, because I certainly understand the difficultness of making decisions right now with things just going upside down. I'm struck with these feelings of uncertainty as well. And, the things like, for example, we still have some old crop grain. I wish we didn't have 1 bushel of old crop grain right now, as much as the markets have gone down, but we do. We're in that situation. So now we've got to figure out what to do. I don't have quite as much new crop sold as I wish I had. So I'm just telling you that so that you can understand too that I'm coming from that same place, and that's what we want to work with. Just to address a question that came across on the chat about asking about the links. They are in the chat, and then at the end of this webinar, Rich will send out a resource page that will have those links on there as well, and some other resources too. So if you can't get it off of the chat, no problem. We'll have that resource page go out to you. So let's dive in here to when plans do change. I think it's very, very important. First and foremost, just acknowledge that this is a really uncomfortable time. And really, if you and your spouse or your business partners can just take a moment to recognize that this is a hard time, you guys are going to get through it, and maybe even take some time to kind of grieve the changes that we're going through. None of us feel very secure right now. It's just a very uncertain time all the way around. We each had a plan for our farms. That was something that when Robin and I did the original financial series back in January and February, we talked a lot about what is your plan for your operation and the finances, and what do cash flows, making projections on cash flows and things like that. We each had a plan for our farm. There was a reason that we laid out that plan. We do probably, in most instances, need to stay the course with our plans, but there may be some tweaks and adjustments that we want to make with the different situations that we're in right now. An example off of Robin's charts is, she talked about these bright spots with Milo. That may be a consideration of switching some acres over to Milo. If obviously there's crop insurance considerations and things like that, but that might be something that folks choose to tweak a little bit. And I can't emphasize this enough. Continue to look at your farm financials and keep those front and center. Even if they don't look as good today as they did, knowing what the ramifications of those numbers look like with the changes is really important to help be able to figure out what you're going to do to go forward. So do continue to work with your financials and look at them so that you can figure out what the pieces are. The next most important thing to do is to consult with key advisors. I really want to stress, do not bear all of the weight of these decisions by yourselves. This is just a hard situation, and there are others that can help you. It is really important to talk to your business partners, and in many family farms, this is going to be your family members. we don't have to bear the responsibilities of all these decisions by ourselves. I feel like anytime that there are 2 or 3 or 4 people that are all focused on that same business, they each can have some input and probably help make the situation better altogether. Together, they will come up with a better idea than sometimes just one person can. Also, talk with your lenders. View them as a resource person. They may, things like, for example, recently interest rates have gone down. There may be some refinancing options that you may be able to do on some of your real estate notes, possibly even some machinery notes that you might want to look into. Some of those programs that Robin talked about through the CARES Act, they may be a preferred provider that can help you with the paperwork on that. So talk with your lender, and they may even see some things that you may be able to shore up. Also, talk with your broker or your marketing advisor. The markets have been incredibly volatile, and they may have some strategies, maybe some options or something along those lines that may be helpful for your situation, but talk with them. All of these people that I'm encouraging you to talk with them just to get their input, and then you and your business partners can go back and make some decisions of how you want to implement any changes you might want to. Talk with your ag retailers to find out if they feel like they're going to be able to secure all the inputs that you will need for this growing season, or if something has changed there. It's better to know that so you can make alternative plans. And then there may be other key advisors that you want to talk with as well. So when it feels like your plan has blown up, which I'm sure a lot of us could probably raise our hands right now, it feels like things are very different. Look for something that you can control. I don't know what that is in your situation. It may just be our own personal reactions and how we talk to those other people that are around us. That may be the only thing that you feel like you can control right now, or there may be other things that you can control as well. I know that there were several women who participated in our Women in Ag event here a couple of months ago. And so I'm speaking to those people who have children that are homeschooling right now. But, we started homeschooling in our district a week and a half ago, I guess now. And I know Monday and Tuesday, I just felt a little out of control because we didn't have our schedule set the way it needed to be. There was a ton of applications. I didn't know what they were. Every single one had its own password. It just was very frustrating. We finally got a little structure around that, and it was just one thing that we had some control over. And so look for those pieces that maybe are just causing high anxiety and get some structure around them as best as you can. When it feels like things are difficult, just take one small step. Make one small decision and execute on it. Then take another step and take another step. Don't necessarily think about all the things that you have to fix right now in this difficult situation, but just take one and embrace that and solidify that, and then move on to the next thing. And continue with our ordinary tasks. This step may be actually quite easy for all of us that are just about ready to embark on planting, because the reality of the busyness of spring planting is kicking in. But continuing with those ordinary tasks of getting ready for planting and feeding our livestock and things like that, executing on those ordinary tasks are going to help make you feel like you have a little more control when you go on to those things that are a little harder. Another thing that I really want you to focus on is discussing a farm safety plan. This first part with washing your hands, staying home if you are sick, and wearing masks, we're seeing that every single night on the news. That's nothing new, but do think about that for your own farm as well. Think about practicing social distancing on your farm. This third one is the one that I want you to talk with your business partners about, though. What if one of you, either yourself or one of your employees, gets sick right here as we're going into planting season? I don't want to think about that for any of us, but it would be better to talk about that and have that conversation right now before you start planting than right in the middle of it. What would be an alternative plan if somebody key gets sick right here during the middle of planting? Another thing is have a plan for others entering your farm. For example, as they're making seed deliveries. One of our seed companies, they sent us a letter probably 10 days or 2 weeks ago, laying out exactly how they were going to make seed deliveries and what that process would look like. And I tell you, that was so helpful, and then helped us to think through, how do we want our other deliveries to happen? And when we go and pick up things, what do we want that to look like to keep everybody safe? So think about that part as well. Next, there are going to be some amendments that you might want to make. So make those amendments to your farm business plan as you need to. Number one, I do want you to go back and review that government stimulus plan. Look through that material a little bit and see if there's anything that might impact your farm, and make the applications as needed on that. Do what you can to control cost. I know we were already in a very difficult time economically, and a lot of people already had their belts cinched up as much as they could. But if you had a new project maybe that you were going to do, or if there's any place that you can control cost, it may be a very good time to consider doing that. Look at refinancing options on your loans. I know there was an awful lot of loans that were refinanced in the last few weeks, but if you have not done that yet, talk with your lender and see if that might be an option for you. Review your marketing plans. There have been opportunities to lock in some wheat prices. If you've got some old crop left in the bin or in farms or in elevator storage, it may be an opportunity to look at pricing some of that, or maybe look at forward contracting some for summer delivery. Also, as Robin talked about, there are a lot of ethanol plants that have closed around the country. It has impacted basis levels on corn. You should look at if you should be locking in some basis levels on corn if you still have some old crop left. And you may want to reevaluate if you have an ethanol plant in your area that's closing, the lack of availability of DGGs, you may need to make some alternative plans. We also want you to be empowered to make decisions. I will tell you, of all the farm families, when I sit down at a kitchen table at a farm, the farmers who are willing to make decisions tend to be the more successful farms that I work with. And it's hard, right? In situations like this, it's hard to make decisions, and it's hard to know what's right. Please accept that some of these decisions that we're going to make right now are going to be wrong in hindsight. We are making the best decisions that we can with the information that's available today. And we know that we don't know the whole picture of how this is going to turn out. We're being forced to make decisions with just very difficult options available to us. What I have found over the years in working with farmers, and then on our own farm as well, is when we're uncomfortable, if we can just make some small decision, it's helpful and gives us reassurance to just continue to make decisions. So some of the questions that came in were about, if I have old crop grain on hand, what should I do? It may be something that you want to look at, maybe dividing that old crop grain into, it depends on how much you have and what your situation is, but you may divide it into 5 or 10 and just take a small chunk of that and sell some of it. You could always re-own it with an option, with a call option. But if it is to the point that it is keeping you up at night and you have super high anxiety, we don't know if that's going to be right or wrong down the road. I've talked to people who 3 weeks ago thought I should sell some old crop grain. Then 2 weeks ago had the same conversation. Then last week had the same exact conversation. And sometimes it's better just to get a little bit of that executed. So make some small decision and move forward. Think about if there's any positive steps in your situation that can be made now. A couple of things that I had brainstormed is, you might want to buy some options on commodities. That may be something you want to look at. If you have not refinanced loans, you could look at lower interest rates and see if there's some possibilities for you. If you have some cash on hand, it may be some opportunities to buy some stocks or add to your retirement savings or 529 account for your students. There could be other ideas as well. But those are, just try to think in your situation, what are some positive steps that I can take advantage of in our situation? So I actually wrote this slide probably 10 days ago now. And this slide actually said, in highly volatile times, no one's going to stop eating. And that was that. And that's true. Nobody's going to stop eating. But we are all learning so much about how the supply chain works and how it maybe didn't work quite the way that we thought it did in many cases. So I think we've all learned a big lesson in how our food actually moves from our farms and then on to the next level. So with that, I hope that we've been able to give you a few ideas of some things that you might be able to do on your own farm. We do want to wish you the best of luck and health and safety. And if you need to have any further conversations at the end of this, we will have the contact information for myself and Robin. And with this, right now, we are going to switch. I'm going to stop my share for a moment and switch this over to Rebeccca. And Rebecca's going to give us some information about some things that we can be doing to handle this difficult time.
Okay. I thought I had this ready to go and I didn't. But I want to thank Robin and LaVell for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And I'll be sharing some resources, some research, as well as some of my own personal experiences. Okay. Not sharing yet, right?
Not yet, Rebeccca.
Okay.
Rebeccca, I see a question here I could address if you would like me to do that for a moment. Okay. So there was a question about, let's see here, if you have some cash grain, last year's cash grain, particularly corn or milo, what's the suggestion to hold or get out now? So again, this is going to be something that's very specific to your situation. Is that grain in the elevator, or is it something that's in your bins that has to be moved? If it does have to be moved, you've got to think through logistically, when can that actually happen? I'm going to speak a little bit from the aspect, milo right now, the basis levels have perked up significantly because we do have exports that were unexpected. Milo is always very, very tricky because it can fall off very quickly as well. So my advice would be to maybe divide that into a few different sales and maybe make a couple of different sales on that. in the Topeka area, myelobastis has really zoomed upward in the last 2 to 3 weeks or so. And so I'd like to take advantage of some of that, but maybe not all at once, because it may continue to go higher too. So, all right, Rebecca, it looks like your slide is there. So I'm going to mute myself so you can go on.
Okay, thank you. So this is a slide that gives information about myself. I just thought it was important to share a little bit about me, and so you'll know where I'm coming from. I grew up on a livestock and crop farm in north central Kansas with my parents and 3 sisters. I was active in 4-H, and my dad is a big K-State fan. I grew up about an hour, a little over an hour from K-State, and that's the only college that we really heard about, and was convinced it was the place to go. So I went on to K-State and really enjoy going to some of the K-State activities, K-State football and basketball games. I've been part of K-State Research and Extension now for almost 24 years. And my husband and I joined our families in 2004. Our friends and neighbors joked about us being almost the Brady Bunch. And at the time, our children were 5, 8, 11, 13, and 16. And so I became a stepmom to 3 preteen or teen girls whose mom had passed away a couple of years prior to that. We do farm over 2,000 acres of row crops, and that consists mainly of soybeans, corn, wheat, and most recently, we've added popcorn. And our family has grown to 16. We now have 4 grandchildren. And I shared a couple of pictures of our farm as I walk down the road. That's one of my coping strategies for stress relief, is walking on our country roads. I'm going to share a little bit more about my inflammatory bowel disease a little bit later. But in this center you see there, my faith is what keeps me grounded and helps me to cope with life's challenges. So I'm going to share a little bit of information about women in agriculture, and many of you will identify with this, but I thought it was important to share. So farm women do experience additional stressors, and there is that role conflict, which we're talking about the home and family matters, or that third shift. So there's conflict or incompatibility between the demands or responsibilities of 2 different roles: the farm business and the home, the housework, the social obligations, personal interests, expectations of self, children, and spouse. And of course, during this time, again, schooling your children at home as well. For some, there may be off-farm job. I know that LaVell and Robin talked about that. I'm also, of course, working from home. Our children are all grown, although my youngest son is here taking college classes and working as well. We also know that daughters-in-law carry the most stress. There's an intergenerational tension. And then there's agricultural stereotypes, where the mainstream images of women in ag often include the farm wife, the bookkeeper, maybe the home gardener, but don't show women making those decisions they make. And there's lack of perceived authority. Others may not acknowledge the women's authority over their own farms or ranches. So let's talk about recognizing stress. I grew up in the 1980s, and we did not talk about stress or coping. I can remember the farm crisis then, and I remember coming home from school one day off of the school bus, and my mom greeted my 3 sisters and I at the door. Dad was back in their bedroom, but didn't know why. And so it was a really scary time for us. Something was occurring, but we didn't know what was happening, with my dad. And to this day, I don't know. I've asked, but my parents can't remember that time. So again, I think it's important to recognize what stress looks like for you. And it may be different for your spouse or a friend. So again, recognize what that looks for you. For me, it's tense neck and shoulder muscles, breathing short, difficulty with sleeping, and stomach upset or distress. So this slide shows the differences between men and women and how we cope with stress. And typically we have the fight or flight response, which means that men tend to think their way through, they look for solutions, whereas women like to talk about their problems. And for us women, we like to talk about our problems. We are not necessarily looking for a solution at that time, but perhaps our spouse or significant other may try to solve our problems. And therefore then it may cause some tension. Women typically, and this is research, pretty recent research, we typically do tend or befriend, okay? It's hardwired in our DNA, our brain chemistry and hormones. You'll see there that with the oxytocin, the trusting and social affiliation hormone as well. And so we turn to friends to cope. And again, we have that caretaking and seeking out support networks. So I am so thankful during this time that we still have we have technology that we can rely on. We still have the telephone that we can call friends and family members as well. But I thought this was important to share because, again, there's differences in between how men and women handle stress. The next few slides are some ideas about coping with stress. And at the very top, you'll see where I put it's okay to not be okay. Allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. It's really difficult, and in difficult times, it's important to acknowledge our feelings and tell ourselves that it's okay to feel that way. Whatever you're feeling, it's valid, and take time to process, to think or not to think about it. So one of my go-to mechanisms is breathing, and you may hear this called diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing. This is something that most of us don't do on a regular basis, although I hope there's more of us that do that than not. But I really would like us to try this. This is something that you can do anytime, basically, and anywhere. And so again, this is really my go-to. And so I want you to, and you can do this with your eyes closed if it helps you to concentrate more. But I want you to put your right hand on your belly and then your left hand on your chest. Take a breath through your nose. And as you do that, your belly should rise or extend as you take a breath, and your chest should not. And then pause and exhale and release the air again, and then pause. So let's try that, okay? Take a breath through your nose, pause, and then exhale, release the air. And again, make sure you're feeling your belly rise and not your chest. Once again, inhale, take a breath, pause, exhale. Now, this strategy can also be used when we feel like we're getting emotionally hijacked, when our emotions are dictating our response. And that you might find this happening now, maybe again with your spouse, significant other, or as a parent. And so instead of utilizing our reasoning or problem solving part of our brain, we allow those emotions to take over. So again, this strategy can be used in a lot of different situations. Another strategy is music, and this may be playing your own music or listening to music. I have a playlist with some uplifting, encouraging, contemporary Christian songs that I listen to. And again, I listen to those maybe when I'm doing housework, most of the time not on my walk, but whenever I need something, I feel like I need something to kind of encourage me and lift me up. Another one is laugh. And you can see here that there's a picture of a pretty green banana in a sack on my countertop. I ordered groceries for the first time online, I believe it was last week, and they actually delivered them out here in the country. And as I was putting away my groceries, I was realizing that I just had one banana and wondered why I didn't get a bunch of bananas like I thought I had ordered. But then I remembered that Our local grocery store sells them individually, not in a bunch. And so I had forgotten to multiply that by, 5 or 6 to get a bunch of bananas. So I laughed. I'm at myself for doing that. And laughter can be really good coping mechanism. So again, make sure that there's plenty of laughter during your days. Gratitude journal is another one, and it's strongly and consistently associated with greater happiness. It helps people to feel more positive emotions, relish good experiences, improve their health, and deal with adversity, as well as build strong relationships. And so even in the midst of social isolation, it's important to think about all the things that we have to be grateful for. And most of us can find 2 or 3 things every day that we can be grateful for. The last one on this slide is social support, and making connections is a basic human need. And so again, we can pick up the telephone, we can FaceTime, Skype, whatever it is, but we can still have that social support, and it's important to continue to connect. Here are some other strategies for caring for yourself. And eating healthy foods, of course, is very important. Food is fuel for our brain and our body. And food can affect our mood, and our mood can also affect what we eat. It's important to eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and lean protein. Drink plenty of water. Sleep, that's something I know as farm families, there's a lot of late nights, early mornings. We feel like, sometimes sleep isn't important to us, but it really is. It's vital. So getting enough sleep leads to clearer thinking, better decision-making, more positive mood, and better emotional management. And all those things we could use, again, especially now, we're able to make better decisions when we have enough sleep. And research shows that most of us need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Self-talk, you'll see there in the center, that's something else that really impacts our mood and our behavior. And we sometimes say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to those that we love. And so we really need to think about, what are we telling ourselves? A couple of things, I finished my conflict resolution certification through K-State about a year ago. And one of the things that we spent some time doing is reframing. And that's taking a negative perception and substitute it with a positive or neutral one without denying the situation. For example, I can say to myself, social distancing really stinks because I can't see my family. I can't hold and play with my almost-year-old grandson. And actually, he'll have his first birthday next Friday on the 17th, and we won't be able to celebrate that the way we normally would. Or I can say to myself, this gives me an opportunity to take more walks on my country roads, see outside. My office here at home, I have a window where I can see outside where my office in town does not. I can enjoy nature, the sun, my flowers, and also gain more tools in my coping toolbox. The other there is acceptance. And it's important to recognize what we can and cannot control in our lives. And LaVell talked about that, thinking about, what are some things that we can control? We can't control how much it rains. We can't control the markets. And so it's really important, again, to accept those things that we cannot control. You'll also see hobbies there. And it's important for all of us to have hobbies. It provides a healthy diversion from the sensory overload that can produce or perpetuate the stress response. So if you don't have a hobby, I encourage you to start exploring. Being active, of course, there's a lot of research out there about all the benefits of being active. And most of us know about the physical or the physiological impact, but there's multiple psychological benefits as well. And that's improved mental alertness, perception, informational processing, self-esteem, and decreased feelings of depression, anxiety, and overall sense of stress and tension. So it's really important to be active, and I would encourage you to be active every day. Find ways to enjoy the activity. We're more likely to participate in that activity if we enjoy it. And then the last one there is journaling. For some people, journaling is a really good coping mechanism because it can clear their mind of thoughts, as thoughts and feelings are transferred from their mind to the written page. And journaling impacts our physical and emotional health in many ways and has both immediate effects and long-term effects as well. So here are some resources, and I believe you did receive that list just prior to starting the webinar. In closing, I do want to encourage you to have a coping plan, strategies plan. And I'm going to click on this. This is on that list of resources. This is something available through K-State Research and Extension. But as you can see, there's a list of strategies for a coping toolbox there. And you can use this to make your own plans. Okay. I want to close with, I learned the hard way about how to figure out how to cope with stress. And I mentioned earlier about my inflammatory bowel disease. In 2002 to 2003, I went through separation and divorce from my ex-husband, who's the father of my sons. And it was a very stressful time. I did not cope well with that. In 2004, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which has progressed to Crohn's disease. And while we still don't know what causes inflammatory bowel diseases, we do know that stress has a negative impact on our immune system, and inflammatory bowel disease is an autoimmune disease. I am thankful, however, that I receive immunosuppressant infusions every 8 weeks, and it's kept my disease in remission since 2011. But stress management is something that I do every single day, and again, I encourage you to do the same. Let's see. That's the end of my presentation. I think we are ready to take questions.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. LaVell, if you could share that slide that has all of our contact information on it, that might be a good one to have up there while we're taking questions. We did have a couple come in here after my presentation. Thoughts on how the sunflower market will be impacted. The sunflowers are typically an oil seed that will track somewhat with the soybean market. So, you know, I don't have any specific information on that, but in general, that's how the soybean market runs, is what's going on with, or the sunflower market with the soybean market as well. And then there was one on barley. Rich, you can key in on this too. We used to grow quite a bit of barley in Kansas, but we just don't have the marketing channels anymore to really sell that commodity. You know, like you were mentioning with India there, we would have to be developing those marketing channels to be able to do any large scale marketing. LaVell, do you have any comments on that, or Rich?
I really don't have anything to add to that. I do think we need the end users close by to really have a good market for that. So maybe something specialty possibly.
Yeah. And there was a comment here asking about the effects on land values. So Rich did put in the chat, we have 2 more webinars coming up from our department in agricultural economics. One on Thursday by Dr. Glenn Tonzer is going to focus on the livestock markets. I give a very brief overview, but he's going to dive much deeper into what's going on there. So that's this Thursday at 7 o'clock. And then next week, Thursday at 7 o'clock, is Dr. Michael Taylor talking about the effect on land values. So I do some work in that area too, land values. As we see a pullback in profitability in ag, that certainly long-term could affect our land values. We've been holding fairly steady through most of this downturn. So, you know, that is something that we will see, but overall, I don't think it'll have a huge effect on land values unless it's a very prolonged, even more severe downturn at this point. How do we find or register for the webinars coming up? I was going to mention, when you registered for this webinar, there was a little checkbox of if you want to be on our mailing list. So any of you that checked that box, Rich Llewellyn will put you on our mailing list. We have a mailing that goes out every Monday to tell you what's updated on our website. And then he typically does special mailings as well on our events that are coming up. So if you check that box, you should be on that list. And then if you didn't check that box but you want to, email one of us and we'll get you on there. But we will have the additional resources. I know some of you couldn't copy out of the chat. I think that is in response. We had to really lock down security. If you've heard about Zoom bombing or people coming on and doing some bad things during the webinar, we've really tightened security to make sure that doesn't happen. And one of those settings must have made it so you can't copy out of the chat. So we will email those links out and get you some information for those upcoming webinars, as well as the ones that already happened and were recorded. LaVell or Rebecca, did you see any other questions there you want to address?
I had one, but I think I answered it in relation to why daughter-in-laws carry the most stress. And that intergenerational tension between perhaps their husband and mother and father-in-law as well. That's what the research shows anyway. And again, if you're a daughter-in-law, you probably can relate to that.
And a question here, just a little more elaboration on why there's potential for milo than corn. Right now, China has been making some purchases of milo, and that is really affecting its price in relation to corn. So right now in our eastern and central Kansas, milo is actually having a cash price higher than corn in many instances. Will this carry through until next fall? I'm not sure, but opening that trading with China again has really helped our milo or grain sorghum market.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I just pulled up our local markets. A month ago, the milo and the corn, and this would be Topeka, milo and corn were just about the same price, or milo was even a discount. And now milo is a 53-cent premium to corn for the spot market. And for new crop, it's a 20-cent premium to corn. That's unusual. And it's difficult to plant for fall because you don't know if that strength and that demand is going to be there, because really the only way to lock in that premium is to lock in the basis level, which obligates you for delivery. So it's something you want to carefully consider how you handle that on your own farm operation.
A question from Stacy here. When will we hear about the programs for livestock, dairy, and specialty crops? Will that be coming through FSA? Yes, I believe that will be coming through FSA. So that $9.5 billion is discretionary funding that the USDA secretary will be determining how it is divided up, and he's in the process of doing that right now. So I think we'll hear something on that fairly soon, but right now it's yet to be determined. And I'm assuming the question there too on the CCC, much info out on that yet. You know, that $14 billion that I alluded to was a replenishment of the Commodity Credit Corporation funds. There, I don't think would be any announcement on any MFP type payments until we really see how long this is going to last as far as the prolonged down market in our commodities. So I don't think there'll be any announcement on that for a while, if some more MFP type payments might be coming. Rebecca or LaVell, any other ones there you want to weigh in on?
I don't see any additional. Rebecca, I don't know if there's one about son-in-laws on there too, maybe if you want to speak to that possibly.
Yes, I'm assuming it's probably in relation to being part of an intergenerational farm where it's the wife and her parents. You know, certainly there's could be tension there with the family dynamics. I guess I haven't read research along that line. What we do know, of course, is those family relationships, those family dynamics can play a very big role in not only the business, but also within the family. So it's so important to be mindful of that. And I don't know if you saw, but I typed in the chat that I am going to share with Rick a resource, a K-State Research Extension resource about family talk, farm and ranch families that Charlotte Shop Olson did. And there's other resources available, but though, again, those family relationships and family dynamics that occur, it's so important to be mindful of that, because we know that there are families who no longer get along or talk because of situations that have occurred.
Well, I think we've hit the end of our time here, so I will let everyone go. I do want to mention one thing that we learned when we did our Women in Ag project this winter. We had over 685 participants in that program in 32 local sites across Kansas. And one thing that was really important was the networking that occurred between those participants. So we have talked, as we're working at home here, how we can help you. And one of the things that I was thinking about was doing some small groups, small women in ag kind of groups where you could meet like this with Zoom, possibly turn on your cameras and see each other and just talk about some of the issues that you're having as a farm wife, as a now homeschooling parent, and and all these agriculture issues. So we're going to be asking in a follow-up survey if you want to be part of a small group that wants to continue the conversation with the local extension agent facilitating and just meeting others in your area that are going through some of these same struggles. So be watching for that, and if you want to participate, we hope you can. And with that, I think I'll just thank everybody for coming. I thank LaVell and Rebeccca for helping out or doing this presentation with me, and Rich Llewellyn for running the technology flawlessly as always. So if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us. LaVell and Rebeccca, anything else?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks again.